Who sent that thing?
My creator.
But then a lot of nice things turn bad out there.
What's his name, then? No!
Welcome to the Mr. Screen channel. Anyone who follows the comics knows very well that Doctor Doom has never had many allies, especially because he alone can do great damage to many heroes. However, many interesting things happen on Earth 616, and based on that, I will bring here this part of the story based on my creation as well so that we can analyze how all these events would be. Without further ado, let's get straight to the point. Rebirth in Darkness. After his death, Tony Stark should not have returned. The final sacrifice on the battlefield against Thanos was, in his mind, the culmination of his journey as Iron Man. But the multiverse has its own plans and forces beyond human comprehension, and somewhere in the fabric of reality, something called him back. Waking up in a distorted reality, Stark found himself in Latveria, on the throne of an empire that he had not built, but that seemed to belong to him. His body was different, more robust, and the cloak that covered his shoulders was heavy and familiar. As he looked into the mirror, the truth was revealed. He had been reborn not as Iron Man, but as Victor Von Doom. Stark's mind, now merged with that of one of the world's greatest geniuses and sorcerers, had merged into something new, Doom Stark. Combining his advanced technology with Doom's mastery of magic, Stark realized that this new beginning was more than a second chance. It was an opportunity to reshape the world and the multiverse in his own image, without the moral constraints he had once respected. The world had failed him, and the Earth was on the brink of collapse once again. He would have to ensure that his vision of absolute control came to fruition. The vision of the end. The fusion of Tony Stark and Doom brought with it power, but also a curse, visions of possible futures. One such vision haunted his mind night after night. The attack of Knull, the god of the symbiotes, and the end of Earth as they knew it. Knull, an ancient force that ruled over the symbiotes, had broken free and was rapidly approaching, ready to plunge the universe into darkness. In the vision, Stark saw the Avengers falling one by one. Thor, the god of thunder, crushed by symbiotes. Captain America, undone, powerless before Knull's overwhelming power. Tony himself, despite his armor and his renewed power, being destroyed in a desperate battle against the Entity. The Earth, subjugated, had become an empty shell, plunged into eternal darkness. He woke up every night sweating, but unlike before, he felt no fear. He felt determination. With Doom's powers in his hands and his genius intact, he knew he could prevent this future. However, he could not trust the old heroes, stuck in their outdated ethics. He would need to create his own team and use methods that others would not dare. The pact with Norman Osborn. To defeat Knull and secure his sovereignty over Earth, Stark knew he needed allies who were willing to go beyond the conventional boundaries of morality. It was then that he remembered Norman Osborn, the former Green Goblin and former director of HMMER, someone who understood power and was willing to do anything to obtain it. Norman was intelligent, but more than that, he shared Stark's philosophy. Absolute control was the only way to ensure peace. The two met in a secluded location, away from the eyes of the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D., and there, under the protection of magical and invisible force fields, a new pact was sealed. "Do you know what's coming, Norman?" asked Stark, now in his new mystical armor, which combined the brutality of Doom's design with the technological sophistication of his former creations. "Another alien invasion. I'm surprised they haven't gotten tired of losing to us yet," Osborn replied with a cynical smile. "Not this time," Stark said coldly. "Knull, the god of symbiotes, is coming. And when he does, the world as we know it will cease to exist." Osborn raised an eyebrow. "And you think good old Captain America is going to fix this?" "No. And that's why I need you, Norman. We need something new, something they can't see coming. I can't lead alone." Norman smiled. "You mean the Dark Avengers, don't you? I always knew you'd ask me for help someday." "The Dark Avengers, but with a difference," Stark said, crossing his arms. "This time, the goal isn't just to fight the threats that come our way. This time, we dominate." Norman Osborn, ever ambitious, nodded. "Count me in, Doom Stark. Recruiting the Dark Avengers." With Osborn at his side, Stark began recruiting old villains and anti-heroes, those who could operate in the shadows and do what traditional heroes wouldn't. The first to be called in was Yelena Belova, the Black Widow, whose morals were much more flexible than Natasha's. Stark also went after John Walker, the U.S. agent, whose brutality was both a blessing and a curse. You want me to be on your team? Walker asked, his eyes narrowing as he stared at Stark in his new armor. You know, I'm not exactly an Avengers-style hero. That's exactly why you're here, Stark replied. I need someone who's not afraid to get dirty. Walker smiled slightly. I'll take it. Others joined the group. Taskmaster, whose ability to mimic any skill made him a lethal weapon. Ghost, whose ability to turn intangible would be crucial to stealth missions. And Abomination, whose brute strength would be essential against the hordes of symbiotes that Knull would bring with him. These Dark Avengers were not the heroes the world expected, but they were the only ones capable of doing what was necessary to stop Knull and ensure that Doom Stark maintained his dominion over the planet. The Sovereignty Plan. While Earth's heroes, such as the Avengers and the Fantastic Four, remain oblivious to the true nature of the threat, Stark and his new allies worked in secret. Doom Stark didn't just want to defeat Knull, he wanted to ensure that, after his victory, he would be in complete control of the planet. To this end, he and Osborn devised a plan that involved building a network of mystical and technological devices around the Earth, something that could contain Knull. But that would also give Stark absolute control over communications, transportation, and most importantly, people's minds. Do you really think you can control everyone? Yelena asked in a moment of doubt. It's not about total control, Stark replied. It's about making sure they have no choice. The arrival of Knull. Stark's preparations were not in vain. Months later, the first waves of symbiotes began to infiltrate Earth, transforming entire cities into Knull-controlled hives. The traditional heroes, as always, rushed to the front lines, but their efforts were insufficient. It was then that Doom Stark and his Dark Avengers stepped in. With Stark's superior technology and arcane charms, they managed to contain the invasions in key areas, while manipulating the symbiotic forces to their own advantage. During the final battle, Stark confronted Knull directly. With his Doom armor enhanced by magic and technology, he launched a devastating attack that, while not killing Knull, weakened the symbiote god enough to force him to retreat temporarily. A new world. Earth was saved, but at a high cost. Many heroes had fallen, and confidence in the old guard was shaken. It was at this moment that Doom Stark revealed his ultimate plan, a new world government, under his leadership and that of the Dark Avengers. Under the guise of protecting Earth from future threats, he declared himself the rightful ruler of the planet. Starting today, Stark said in a global broadcast, Earth will no longer be a victim of chaos. Under my command, we will be strong. We will be invincible. And so, the world entered a new era, the era of Doom Stark. The shadow of discord. Norman Osborn stood in the corner of the command room, watching as Doom Stark proclaimed himself the absolute ruler of Earth. He watched the broadcast with a neutral expression, but inside his mind, a whirlwind of thoughts and worries consumed him. Stark had gone too far. Norman knew he was no saint, but even he had his limits, and the idea of a world controlled by a single figure, without opposition, made him uneasy. As the broadcast ended and the lights in the room dimmed, Osborn approached Doom Stark, crossing his arms. Impressive, Tony, Osborn began, his tone thin with irony. Do you really think you can keep this up indefinitely? Control the entire world without anyone lifting a finger against you? Stark, now encased in his Doom armor, turned slowly, his eyes glowing beneath his metal mask. He had the posture of a newly crowned king, confident in his power. Norman, I'm not just controlling the world, Stark replied, his voice cold and calculated. I'm saving it from itself. You saw what happened when we left the fate of the planet in the hands of weak ideals and hesitant heroes. That won't happen on my watch. Norman smiled, but there was a bitterness in his expression. It's funny, Tony. When you brought me in for this, I thought we were building something to protect ourselves, to make sure humanity had a chance against threats like Knull. But it seems what you really wanted was to be the new king of the world. Doom Stark showed no sign of being shaken. And why not? Who else would be capable? You? The Avengers? They've knelt before Thanos, before Ultron, before any threat that comes their way. I'm not here to be popular, Norman. I'm here to make sure we never again fall victim to our own weakness. Osborn took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as his voice grew firmer. I'm not here to be led, Stark. I'm a strategist, not a subject. We had an agreement. You would lead the operations, but it wasn't to become a global dictatorship. This is your plan, not mine. I still think there's a way out. The world won't accept a sovereign for long. Stark stepped closer to Norman, standing his ground. They may not accept it now, But in time, they'll realize this is the only solution. With me in charge, there will be no more uncertainty. Chaos will be eradicated. Norman was silent for a few seconds before finally saying, "You're playing with fire, Tony. I always thought you had limits. Now I see you have none. And believe me, that's going to come back to haunt you." "Until then, Norman," Stark replied, turning his attention back to the holograms and charts floating around him. "I will remain sovereign. And if you have a problem with that, feel free to leave." Osborn clenched his fists, holding back his anger. He knew Stark was too powerful at the moment. Going head-to-head with him would be futile, but Norman had always been a master of patience and manipulation. He would have to wait for the right time to make his move. Until then, he would stay close, watching, calculating, waiting for the perfect opportunity to take Doom Stark down. The Dark Avengers Summit. As Doom Stark's control solidified, the Dark Avengers group he and Osborn had formed began to feel the growing tensions. The group, composed of reformed villains, mercenaries, and agents of chaos, was not exactly a cohesive team, and each member's personal ambitions threatened to tear the fragile alliance apart. Yelena Belova, the new Black Widow, began to question Stark's methods. She approached Taskmaster in one of the underground hideouts that served as the Dark Avengers' base of operations. "You've noticed what Stark's doing, haven't you?" Yelena asked as she buckled on her combat bracers. Taskmaster, sitting calmly in the corner, shrugged. "He's consolidating power." "What's new?" "Everyone who has a chance to rule does it." "It's not about power," Yelena countered. "It's about total control. Stark isn't just trying to maintain order. He's imposing tyranny disguised as security." Taskmaster gave a dry laugh. "If you're worried about morality, maybe you're on the wrong team, Belova." "It's not about morality," Yelena said, her eyes narrowing. "It's about survival. He's painting a target on our backs. If the Avengers or any of the other remaining heroes realize what's really going on, we'll be the first to go." Taskmaster stared at Yelena for a moment before standing up. "So what do you suggest? We rebel against the most powerful man on the planet?" Yelena shook her head. "Not yet. But we need a way out. Something to protect us when everything falls apart. Because believe me, it will. The seed of betrayal." As tensions between the Dark Avengers grew, Norman Osborn worked quietly, planning his next move. He knew Stark was becoming unstable, his desire for control growing by the day. And Osborn was patient, like a serpent waiting for the right moment to strike. In a private meeting, Osborn met with the Abomination and Ghost. Both were important players in Stark's plan, but Osborn knew they had ambitions of their own. And if he could sow doubt in their minds, he could turn the tide in his favor. "You know Stark's getting paranoid, right?" Osborn said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "He'll discard us as soon as he gets what he wants." Ghost, ever suspicious, looked at Osborn with piercing eyes. "And what do you suggest, Norman?" "That we take him down." Osborn smiled. "Not yet, but we must be prepared for when the time comes. Because trust me, Stark is making a fatal mistake in thinking he can maintain control of everything forever." Abomination crossed his arms, his voice low and menacing. "If he turns against us, I will be ready to crush him." Norman Osborn nodded, satisfied. "Perfect. Just wait. His time will come." The first fissures, despite his confidence, Stark was not naive. He knew that the absolute control he had established would not last without resistance. Resistance was growing in various parts of the world. Small cells of rebels were organizing, composed of former heroes and even former villains who saw Doom Stark as a threat to the balance of the world. In one of his moments of reflection, Stark observed the horizon of Earth through one of the windows of his floating fortress. The planet, seen from above, looked peaceful, but he knew that peace was an illusion. It was at that moment that his mind returned to Osborn. He had always known that Norman could not be trusted. Osborn was cunning, manipulative, and Stark knew he was up to something. But Doom Stark was always one step ahead. The thought of losing control of his empire troubled him deeply. He had sacrificed everything, even his former identity, to achieve what he believed to be true world peace. Now, with enemies both within and without, he knew he would have to act soon. And so, as the world began to question his dominance, Doom Stark began to plan his next move, a move that would secure his supremacy and crush any hope of resistance. The dawn of rebellion. The first stirrings of rebellion appeared in the shadows. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., those who had survived the chaos, infiltrated Doom Stark's defenses, and the remaining Avengers, led by characters such as Sam Wilson and Bucky Barnes, began to mobilize small resistance cells in different parts of the globe. Meanwhile, Norman Osborn, who still feigned loyalty to Stark, quietly organized his own plans. He knew that the key to defeating Doom Stark was not just brute force, but patience and timing. The Silent War began, and Earth was once again about to be the stage for a monumental battle. This time, not against an alien threat or a cosmic force, but against a man who, in his quest for absolute control, had become the tyrant he had always sworn to destroy. Norman Osborn knew that this moment would come, and when it did, he would be ready. Stark's legacy. Tony Stark's death after the final battle against Thanos was a devastating blow to the world. The hero, who had sacrificed everything to save humanity, was celebrated as a martyr, and his legacy was immortalized in monuments, museums, and in the collective memory of the Avengers. But in a hidden dimension, far from the eyes of the living, something dark was moving. In an alternate timeline, Tony Stark was resurrected by unknown forces. This version of Tony did not wake up in the same universe he left behind, but in a place where power and control were the only law. Amidst the chaos, Stark was confronted by an ancient and malevolent presence who offered him power beyond anything he had ever known. Disillusioned and lost after his resurrection, Tony embraced the power, merging his technological genius with the dark magic that this entity offered. He became Doctor Doom, a sovereign who sought not only control, but total domination over all realities. The Return of Doom. Months after the events involving the multiverse and the confrontation with Doctor Strange, Peter Parker, Spider-Man tried to adjust to the new reality. The world had changed, and after the battle against the alternate versions of himself and his villains, Peter was more vigilant than ever. While patrolling the streets of New York, Peter began to notice strange anomalies, areas where time seemed distorted, where technology worked in inexplicable ways, and most alarmingly, where people and objects disappeared without a trace. These anomalies were just the prelude of what was to come. One night, while Peter was investigating one of these phenomena in an abandoned warehouse, he was confronted by a figure that seemed familiar, but at the same time, completely unfamiliar. The figure was wrapped in black armor, with silver details, and a cape that moved as if it had a life of its own. "Who are you?" Peter asked, already in combat stance. The figure laughed, a cold metallic sound that echoed through the warehouse. "You still don't recognize me, Parker. I thought your spider sense was sharper." Peter stood still, his heart beating fast. He knew that voice, but that was impossible. "Tony," Peter stammered, unable to believe what he was seeing. "It can't be. I'm not the man you knew anymore," the figure replied, removing the mask that hid his face. It was Tony Stark, but with a look Peter had never seen before, a look of absolute power mixed with coldness. "I'm Doctor Doom now." Clash of Masters. Peter froze, his mind trying to process what was before him. How could Tony Stark, the man who had been his mentor and one of the world's greatest heroes, have become the villain who now stood before him? "This is a trick, isn't it?" Peter said, taking a step back. "What happened to you, Tony? How is this possible?" Doom smiled, a smile that held no trace of warmth. "I came back from a place of no hope, Parker. A place where I was forced to reevaluate everything. Magic and technology merged within me in a way you cannot understand. I was resurrected, and with it came a new understanding and a new purpose." Peter shook his head, refusing to believe it. "The Tony I knew would never become this. You taught me to be better, to fight for what is right, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. I may have been naive before, but not anymore," Doom replied, his voice low and dangerous. "The world needs a strong leader, someone who can ensure order at any cost. That was Stark's mistake. He believed morality was a limit, but now I see that it is a weakness." "This is madness, Tony," Peter shouted, his spider senses alerting him to the impending danger. "This is not who you are." But before Peter could react, Doom raised a hand, conjuring a wave of energy that threw the young hero against the wall with crushing force. Peter tried to stand up, but the force of the impact left him dizzy. "Parker, you have no idea what is about to happen," Doom said, slowly approaching. "I'm not here to argue. I am here to prepare you for the real enemy. You are all too weak, stuck in obsolete concepts of good and evil. When the real danger arrives, there will be no place for those concepts." Peter struggled to his feet, his eyes fixed on Tony. "You need to stop this, Tony. If there is a greater threat, we can face it together, but not like this." Doom just stared at Peter for a moment before shaking his head. You still don't get it, do you? I'm not the Tony you knew anymore. I'm Doom, and you're not ready. With a wave of his hand, Doom opened a portal that sucked him into another dimension, leaving Peter alone and hurt, but not defeated. The Avengers assemble. After the confrontation with Doom, Peter knew he needed help. He immediately contacted the remaining Avengers, Natasha Romanoff, Bruce Banner, Sam Wilson, and other heroes who were still together after the countless battles they had faced. Gathered in one of the Avengers' old hideouts, Peter explained everything that had happened. He's not the Tony we knew, Peter insisted, seeing the incredulous expressions of his colleagues. He's more powerful than ever, and he's convinced that only he can save the world from whatever it may be. And what does he want? Natasha asked, her eyes calculating the possibilities. To take over the world. To destroy everything. I'm not sure, Peter replied, his voice tinged with uncertainty. But he said we're all too weak to face what's coming. If Stark really has become what you described, he's a threat, Bruce said thoughtfully. We need to find out more about what he's planning and how to stop him. The Avengers agreed to investigate the situation, with Peter leading the search for more information about the new Doctor Doom and his intentions. They knew the coming battle would be like no other, and the thought of facing someone who had once been one of the world's greatest heroes weighed heavily on their minds. The relentless defeat. Days later, the Avengers located Doom in an old abandoned laboratory in Latveria, where he was gathering his forces and building magic-infused war machines. Knowing they didn't have much time, they decided to strike before he was fully prepared. The plan was simple. Go in, disable his defenses, and capture him, in the hopes of restoring Tony's sanity. But as soon as they arrived at the scene, they realized how unprepared they were. Doom was waiting for them. Combining his superior intelligence with mystical power, he proved unbeatable. His defenses were impenetrable, and his attacks were devastating. Within minutes, the Avengers were overwhelmed, one by one. Bruce tried to transform into the Hulk, but Doom used a spell to control his transformation, leaving him trapped in an intermediate form, unable to fight at full strength. Natasha tried to use her espionage skills to infiltrate and disarm the defenses, but Doom predicted her every move, capturing her with ease. Sam Wilson, in his new identity as Captain America, attacked with everything he had, but was quickly neutralized by an energy field. Peter, the last to fall, fought with everything he had, but Doom effortlessly overcame him. In a last desperate attack, Peter tried to convince Tony that there was still hope, that he could redeem himself. But Doom was adamant. You still don't understand, Doom said, lifting Peter by the neck. I'm here to save the world, but not in the way you imagine. And if that means destroying you so you can be rebuilt stronger, then so be it. With a wave of his hand, Doom threw Peter against a wall, knocking him out cold. With all the Avengers defeated, Doom stood over them, his gaze cold and calculating. You are still too weak for what is to come, he said calmly. Consider this a lesson. I am the future, and when true darkness comes, I will be the only one capable of facing it. Without another word, Doom disappeared into a portal, leaving the Avengers lying unconscious. A new awakening when Peter awoke. He was in the Avengers' safe house, surrounded by his wounded comrades. Despite his defeats, he couldn't help but think about Doom's words. What could this threat he feared so much be? And how could they face it when they couldn't even face Tony? As they recovered, the Avengers began to plan their next move. They knew that Doom was more powerful than any enemy they had ever faced, and that they needed more strength, more allies to confront him. Peter, however, couldn't help but feel a weight on his heart. Seeing Tony Stark, the man he admired, turn into a villain was a devastating blow. But at the same time, he knew there was something more behind Tony's transformation. Something they didn't yet fully understand. We will find him again, Peter told the others, his voice full of determination. And next time, we will be ready. The Avengers nodded, knowing that the battle against Doctor Doom was far from over. With the threat of a new darkness on the horizon, they knew they needed to prepare for the fight of their lives. The true enemy. As the Avengers regrouped, Doom continued his preparations. He knew the heroes would return, stronger, more determined. But he also knew that they were not the true enemy. The true threat was approaching, a force that not even his vast powers could face alone. Deep within the multiverse, ancient and powerful entities were beginning to awaken. They had sensed the disruption caused by Doom's use of dark magic and were preparing to take action. These entities, known as the Dark Watchers, were beings who existed to balance chaos and order, and now with Doom threatening the balance of the multiverse, they were ready to act. Doom, aware of his imminent arrival, began gathering allies, not to dominate them, but to prepare for the final battle he knew was coming. He trusted no one, but he understood that to face what was coming, he would need all the help he could get. The rise of Doom. The Dark Watch began sending emissaries to the different realities, trying to prevent the merging of worlds that Doom was about to cause. Their warnings echoed throughout the ends of the multiverse, but few dared to face Doom directly. Meanwhile, Doom consolidated his power, dominating realities and shaping them in his image. He increasingly distanced himself from the man who had once been Tony Stark. He saw himself as the ultimate savior, the one who would sacrifice everything to save the multiverse from imminent destruction. In his mind, he was not a villain, but the only one capable of making the difficult decisions necessary to save existence. He believed that absolute power was justified if the end goal was noble, even if the path was dark. The return of the Avengers. After months of preparation, the Avengers, now strengthened and with new allies, were ready to face Doom again. Peter, now leading the team, was determined to find a way to bring Tony back, or at least stop him from causing more destruction. The final battle was intense and brutal. Doom, at his full power, faced the Avengers and their allies with devastating fury. But this time, the Avengers were ready. They had trained, studied Doom's weaknesses, and were determined not to fail. Peter, using everything he had learned, confronted Doom directly. He tried one last time to reach the man who had once been his mentor, trying to break Dr. Doom's mask and find Tony Stark behind it. "Tony, please stop this," Peter shouted, dodging a devastating attack. "You're better than this. You don't have to be a tyrant to save the world." Doom hesitated for a moment, a split second that gave Peter hope. But soon, the cold, merciless gaze returned. "There is no more Tony Parker. Only Doom," he replied, casting a spell that nearly knocked Peter down. But before the final blow could be struck, something unexpected happened. A powerful presence, neither one of the Avengers nor Doom, manifested itself. It was one of the Dark Watchers, who had arrived to stop the battle. "This conflict is futile," the Watcher said, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "The true threat is approaching, and none of you are prepared." Doom turned to the Watcher, his expression hardening. "I am the only preparation this universe needs." The Watcher laughed, the sound that seemed to resonate in every dimension at once. "You have no idea what is coming, Doom. Neither you nor the Avengers. This is only the beginning, the dark horizon." With those words, the Dark Watcher disappeared, leaving the Avengers and Doom stunned. The battle was over, but the sense of victory was absent. Instead, a sense of deep dread settled over them all. Doom, though powerful, could not ignore the warning. He had underestimated what was at stake. For the first time since his resurrection, he felt a glimmer of doubt. Peter, wounded and exhausted, watched Doom from afar. Even after everything, he still believed that Tony could be saved, but now there was no certainty. "This is not over, Parker," Doom said before opening a new portal. "I fought to save this world from destruction, but it seems that there are greater forces at play. When the time comes, will you be ready?" "I say this because I will be." Doom disappeared, leaving Peter and the Avengers behind. In time, they would recover and prepare for what was to come, but the shadow of Doom and the unknown threat of the Dark Watchers would loom over them. As Peter watched the horizon, he knew that the real battle was yet to come. Doom had won, but not because he was invincible, but because they were all still too weak to face what was to come. The final battle would be different, and they would need to be ready. And so, the world prepared for what could be the greatest threat it had ever faced, with Dr. Doom not as the ultimate villain, but perhaps as the only possible savior on the dark horizon that was approaching. The hidden threat deep within the multiverse, an ancient and powerful shadow began to stir, awakened by Doom's actions. It was a threat not just to a single universe, but to all that existed. And while Doom prepared himself, believing that he was the only salvation, the truth was much more complex. The Avengers, Dr. Doom, and all the forces of good and evil would need to unite, not only to save their worlds, but to preserve their very existence. The war was just beginning, and the true enemy was still in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. So these are our theoretical points. What do you think of all this? Don't forget to leave a comment with your opinion, click the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos. I'm Mr. Screen and see you soon. Bye.